Culture shock is a particularly interesting phenomenon. According to Arnett, Fritz, and Bell in Chapter 9 of Communication Ethics Literacy, Dialogue and Difference, it occurs any time our learned cultural routine is disrupted. It is often associated with someone traveling to faraway countries, but it can just as easily occur when traveling to countries similar to our own or even within our own country. The previous video shows several students and their sense of culture shock at the food choices they were faced with when they found themselves in London for the first time. Traditional British food can be unusual for many palates, and this can be a disruption to one's routine. However, familiar foods can be found if you choose not to indulge in cultural immersion. Arnett, Fritz, and Bell state that culture shapes us with a sense of the routine, and when the routine fails, we find ourselves in shock. I experienced this several years ago when I moved to London, England for a couple of years. I had very little experience with international travel, and I was confused by some of the differences in the kitchen equipment. Grocery stores also proved a challenge as I was unfamiliar with the products. Even foods at some restaurants were daunting at first. Arnett, Fritz, and Bell state that meeting another culture is a journey into difference. Often there is excitement in the first hours, days, or even weeks of a new place, a new culture. Eventually, however, most of us begin to miss the familiar, our own cultural home. This was certainly true for me. As excited as I was to be there, and as much as I loved the thrill of London, I missed the familiarity of home. To cope with this, I often found myself shopping in the military commissary, using the microwave to cook instead of the unfamiliar stove, and eating at the familiar fast food chain restaurants. Similar findings were reported by Amos and Lordley when they did a study of international students at Canadian universities. They stated that international students found comfort in traditional dishes and would often prepare traditional meals for school lunches, as reported on page 62 of the Canadian Journal of Dietetic Practice and Research. Food can be a strong reminder of home as it reaches several senses at once: sight, smell, taste, touch or texture, and even sound. Amos and Lordley cite Garza Guerrero on page 62, who states that culture shock induces a yearning for familiar objects such as food, and explains why international students establish identity through familiar foods as they acculturate. Over time, I found other ways to connect my new home to my familiar culture. One thing I kept in mind was that excitement of being there. I never let anything get in the way of that. While the loss of the familiar was disruptive, rhetorical interruption is what permits us to learn, as stated by Arnett, Fritz, and Bell. They also advise maintaining or acquiring one or two hobbies one can do anywhere as a coping mechanism. I was a member of a Renaissance recreation organization that is worldwide and enjoyed rapier fighting as part of this group. Within a few months of my arrival in London, I contacted the local group and arranged to join their meetings and practices. This connection led to meeting many friends and allowed me to make connections that I never would have made otherwise. I was able to learn about my new home from people who were sympathetic and friendly. They helped to introduce me to some of the unfamiliar foods and products and taught me how to use my oven. It was through this shared connection that we found that I was able to reduce the culture shock and once again find balance. For more information, please see the included references.